Okay, son, what do we do after we go potty?
Should we wash our hands? We're number 2!
So, I just watched the Emoji Movie. That's a way to start off a video. You really just go around telling people that you've done something like that. Nonetheless, the point I want to get across is that the Emoji Movie has been criticized for being a ripoff of pretty much every animated film ever. However, no one could seem to pick exactly what it was ripping off. People have claimed that it was a ripoff of Wreck-It Ralph, the Lego Movie, Inside Out, or some combination of the three. However, if you've seen as many animated films as I have, mainstream animated films, you can realize that the rabbit hole goes a little bit deeper. There is not one thing that this movie does originally. There is not a single original story beat. I know that people say that there's nothing new under the sun, and no matter what you do, you can't get something 100% original, but the Emoji Movie is so unoriginal, it so didn't try anything new, that it has done something that no other movie has done before. This movie actually made me realize how formulaic animated movies have become in the past decade. Let me put it like this. The Emoji Movie isn't everything wrong with cinema, as many people claim, but pretty much everything wrong with cinema is in the Emoji Movie. And of course, it's definitely ripe for review. It's been something that I wanted to review since I originally heard about it. However, since most of his problems are cliches, it gives me a conundrum. I didn't want to constantly break the pace in an Emoji Movie review to talk about why each cliche was bad, because it would break the flow massively. As spoilers, most things on this list are in the Emoji Movie. So I've decided to have a little bit of fun and sort of make this a pseudo two-parter. Today, we're doing a list of the top 11 worst animation cliches because no one is immune to them. And in this list, I'm planning to go into detail on my problem with these select cliches, so I don't have to constantly pause my Emoji Movie review to talk about why this doesn't work in the grander scope of things. Let's establish a few ground rules first. While I am going to have a lot of focus on movies in general, I'm also going to be giving some focus to animated television, because that's also fallen into formula as of late, if my big mouth review didn't give that away a little bit. On top of that, I am only focusing on Western animation. I don't watch enough anime to really gauge cliches and overused tropes that anime suffers from. When you watch a lot of one type of thing, you tend to notice patterns and trends, and they've really been coming to a head in the past couple of reviews. I think that this list is kind of a necessary evil. I want to get this all out of my system so it doesn't continually bog down my reviews in the future. And you have to keep in mind that many of the things I'm going to talk about, they aren't exclusive to animation, but they're far more frequent in animated movies and television. And for a final rule, I'm going to ignore trends that have largely died, like animated movies obsessively trying to save the rainforest. With that being said, let's rip these cliches a new one and hope that they die for good. Disclaimer, not even good cartoons or movies are immune from cliches. In fact, some of my favorite movies of all time have these cliches. Sometimes these cliches come up because a movie that used this cliche was so good when it originally released. So please keep that in mind, as I am going to be talking about some movies that I really do like, specifically the parts about these movies that I don't like. You know, when you get down to it, the best place to start this video really is at the end. And nowadays, there's only one way that you're allowed to end an animated film, and that's a dance party ending. I'm sure that this one isn't annoying to only me, and many people might have expected it somewhere higher on the list. The thing about this trope is that it usually doesn't bother me in the moment, at least until recently with recent movies. The dance party ending, from what I can tell, started with Shrek, like many of the worst trends of the industry. And since then, every animated film ever feels like they need to end with all their characters dancing to one last song to pad out the soundtrack. There are two problems that I've noticed cropping up from this, besides the fact that this is in every movie ever. The biggest problem is when it really comes across like the writers don't actually know how to end their story and just go into random dancing, like it's a kid's sitcom from the 90s. The other problem is that everyone dancing has basically become shorthand for everyone is happy in this ending, until the sequel 4 years later. We don't need to go through the effort of actually showing these characters in the new lives they lead. They're so devoid of conflict that they could just drop everything they're doing and go dancing. I get that with DreamWorks it's tradition at this point, but it's just the legions of imitators that have sunk this below tolerability. And besides, it's usually just watching characters that are unskilled at dancing. That's not interesting. If you want to wow me with your unique ways your character moves, you should have gotten to that earlier in the movie. And it's always to some pop song that immediately dates the movie, which can be quite jarring if it's otherwise timeless, and has a message that's supposed to resonate throughout the ages. At this point, if you ask me, any movie that ends with their characters just dancing for no real reason can get Shrek'd. Yeah, that reference was painful. I know it was. Now hopefully, that's what you get to think about every single time that you see a dance party ending, because that's the pain that I feel every time I see a dance party ending. I can only justify this being at number 11 because it is at the end, and it usually doesn't affect my enjoyment of the overall product. Unlike... I've gone on and on about this one, especially in my top 20 worst opening themes list, so I'll try to keep it short. I've only seen a cartoon with a rap theme song work once, in history. The first Western television cartoon to air was Crusader Rabbit, back in 1949. It's now 2017. There have been literally thousands of cartoons to air in the meantime. And the only one of these that managed to pull off a rapping theme song is Danny Phantom. And it's kind of a scenario where the exception proves the rule about how hard it is. Simply put, you cannot make this work. It's always awkward, forced, and stupid. It always reeks of marketing hacks, and it is never made by someone who actually knows how to rap, or even has any decent flow. It's always an immediate attempt to cash in on pop culture trends, even if rap isn't relevant at the time. When Hammerman, someone who actually raps, couldn't get it down, what hope does some poor writer sitting in an office who doesn't know what an MP3 is have? Rap theme songs don't create the absolute worst theme song ever, except the Captain Planet Season 6 theme song, but they never create a good product, and they always create a consistently awful product. It's nothing inherently wrong with the genre. Theoretically, it's possible to make it work. Like, literally, we haven't fully determined if it's physically possible, but there are scientists and shit trying to get a definitive answer. The problem is that the genre seems to be attractive to the marketing hacks that want to be edgy, or grant their show or characters edginess. And it's pretty much a scientific fact that marketing hacks repel actual edginess and the ability to relate to the youths. The simplest way to put it, anyone who wants to make one of these rapping theme songs really needs to leave their bubble in order to write a good rap. But the second that they leave their bubble and actually do that, they'll realize that all but one rap theme song in history has been absolutely horrendous, and they won't want to write a rap theme song for their cartoon ever again. What puts this higher than the dance party ending is that even if it's for a good show, you've got to get through this stupid, awful theme song every time you want to watch a new episode. And it's just obnoxious. I went into this recently with my Big Mouth review, so I don't want to dwell here. When it comes to animation aimed at adults, I often get the impression that it doesn't want to be animation, because it seems like they never put any effort into the visuals. We have people made of very simple shapes with no dynamic posing, standing with half-elated expressions, just staring at each other, just talking about things that cartoons who actually wanted to be a cartoon would be animating. And that's even ignoring things like the dad noises jokes from Family Guy, or one of their cutaways, which was, no joke, about 30 seconds of a still frame while Peter waited for a song to start. When I originally brought this up, people had given me counterexamples, like The Boondocks and Black Dynamite. And yes, those shows are well animated. The problem is that one is 5 years old and the other one is 10 years old, and neither one of them are making new episodes. And even back then they were exceptions. Most adult cartoons look like absolute trash. The problem is that it's the standard, the default, and I don't really understand why. I gave theories that it could be because of how The Simpsons characters are designed, or that South Park is cutouts, but I don't know if that fully describes it. King Star King and Mr. Pickles went out of their way to be as ugly as possible, consistently, and not in an interesting way either. Alan Gregory almost didn't even try to be animated. And this problem gets even more crazy when you realize that it's in the good adult cartoons too. The animation is the worst part of BoJack Horseman, for instance, even back in season 1. I hear a lot of people bring up Archer as an exception. Archer is a little bit different, but that's because it has well-designed characters. The animation itself, the movements of those characters, is actually rather poor. It often looks like they're moving well-drawn cutouts in the earlier seasons, because the movements are stiff and the angles don't change. I don't remember the last adult cartoon I've seen that even attempted dynamic posing. The Samurai Jack cartoon is an exception. In every other adult cartoon, the arms are constantly at the sides of the characters, and no one has any body language, which is an incredibly important part of communication. And do I even need to bring up cartoons like 12 Ounce Mouse? Animation requires money. If you don't want to spend the money, don't make the animation. Not to mention that every episode of Family Guy costs $1 million. Makes those dad noises jokes just hurt a little bit more, don't they?
I fed up with this world.
Even with all that said though, I still think that Big Mouth is the bottom of the barrel. There are no defending the choices made in the design of that show. Especially when you can easily raise the appearance of the characters by doing something as simple as removing the character's lips. Here's a quick tip. In animation and in drawing, lips tend to look awful all the time. It's one of those details that's hard to get right and nearly impossible to stylize. Almost every character with lips that you draw will look better without lips. All of this gets even more painful when you learn that Big Mouth was animated by Titmouse. Even if you've never heard of them before, you've probably seen their work. They animated Black Dynamite, Class of 3000, and many intros like the one for Avatar The Last Airbender and the one for Megas XLR. Then again, recently they've also animated Breadwinners, King Star King, and, well, Big Mouth.
Get the hell out, Shannon! Get out!
What the fuck happened? I get that the impression of being an adult is that the world is all edgy and ugly, so there's a temptation to make the animation for adults as edgy and ugly as possible. But that impression is actually something you outgrow when you actually become an adult. And honestly, the shit animation in most adult cartoons does give me the impression that they're so painfully immature. And once again, not wanting to be a cartoon. Why is every single adult cartoon a comedy? Actually, no, comedies have variety. Adult comedy cartoons just don't. Animation aimed at kids has comedy, but it also has mysteries, superhero shows, action shows, fantasy shows, just a stunning variety. But animation aimed at adults that isn't anime or the Samurai Jack reboot, it's always a comedy. Just naming the most famous ones off the top of my head: South Park, Robot Chicken, The Simpsons, Family Guy, Archer, Bob's Burgers, Rick and Morty, Futurama. While some of them have subgenres, Rick and Morty and Futurama are also science fiction shows, they're all primarily a comedy. Even worse, they seem to follow one of two templates: the South Park template or the Family Guy / Simpsons template. Robot Chicken is an exception. I can boil down 95% of adult cartoons to trying to be like South Park or The Simpsons or Family Guy. Full English, Mr. Pickles, Committed, Alan Gregory, The Nut Shack, Adult Party Cartoon. This isn't building on trends or development. This is stagnation. This even seeps into shows that I absolutely love. BoJack Horseman felt the need to disguise itself as a Family Guy style show to get anyone invested. Rick and Morty feels the need to have Beth and Jerry, which are every form of awful. I don't care how realistic their portrayal of marriage is supposedly, they weigh down the show. Alone, together, they're miserable characters. When you come down to it, this is probably the most damaging thing to the reputation of television animation. It's common for adults to assume that animation is a genre like, say, westerns. It's not. Animation is a medium. But it's hard to blame the general public when every single fucking cartoon aimed at adults is interchangeable. You can either get South Park cash-in number 972 or Family Guy cash-in number 574. I get that when it comes to the latter, the same person is behind Family Guy, American Dad, The Cleveland Show, and was involved in the creation of Border Town. Some more pretty interchangeable shows, but that's not an excuse. Look at someone like Steven Spielberg. He directed Jaws, E.T., Raiders of the Lost Ark, Back to the Future. All movies that have wildly different genres and tones. Even one person can have a teensy bit of variety. Unless we're talking about adult animation, I guess. Then the entire industry doesn't. You know what would be really cool? Seeing a Western animated adult mystery series. You know, an adult version of Gravity Falls. Maybe a Western animated adult fantasy series. an adult Adventure Time, a Western animated horror series, an adult version of Courage the Cowardly Dog. I get that adult is the wrong word to use because these series are a million times more adult than Alan Gregory or whatever the hell Comedy Central has spit out, and that's sad. There is one exception to this, it seems, the Samurai Jack reboot, but I don't really count that in this trend because it's based on a pre-existing franchise, and it understands that its previous audience had grown up over the years. I'm guessing that the only thing that's stopping anyone from trying their own adult animated action series or film noir or fantasy is that Fox, Comedy Central, Adult Swim, they're scared. They don't want to take chances on this. I can tell that there's an audience for it nowadays. Adult animation in general is more accepted, even though it's all the fucking same, and it seems like people are craving something new. At least I am. BoJack Horseman did prove that people want something more insightful. People loved its deeper later seasons and absolutely hated the lowbrow first few episodes. And I'm absolutely fed up about sitcoms, about deformed fish people just talking about things that they should be fucking animating. If you want the mainstream to take animation seriously as a medium and not a genre, this is the place you have to start. This is what's going to change public perception. There are so many possibilities that adult animation is keeping itself restricted from, when the kid stuff seems to absolutely thrive on these possibilities. For years and years, we had to deal with a particular plague on the animation world. The live-action remakes of cartoons that would just animate the main character in shitty CGI, with kid-pandering comedy that didn't even entertain kids. And it would always be aimed directly at kids, even if the show was so old or unknown that kids probably wouldn't be in the primary audience. And in the entirety of the 2000s and much of the 2010s, it seemed like every year we got a new one. From Scooby-Doo to the Smurfs to the Chipmunks, all lowbrow awful. Not one of them seemed to crack the level of good or acceptable, and most people were constantly wondering why they made any money at all. Lately, though, the trend seems to have died. Maybe this is because of another obnoxious cliche that makes me wonder why on earth it's making any money. The Disney live-action remakes. I'm cheating a little bit, but at this point, it is a cliche, and it is one that I've grown significant problems with in recent years. It's no secret that Disney has gotten a love affair with remaking their animated films in live action, and quite frankly, it annoys me to no end. It annoys a lot of people to no end. Alice in Wonderland, The Jungle Book, Mulan, The Little Mermaid, Aladdin, Peter Pan, and Beauty and the Beast. And this would go on forever if I just listed them all. Just assume that Disney is remaking every single movie that they've ever made as a mediocre live action whatever. You know, except for Black Cauldron or other movies that kind of deserve to be remade into something decent. I'm not going to try to complain about remakes in general, as that's a Hollywood problem that's been beaten to the ground, but I think that Disney remaking their old animation films into live action, even if there was no point to doing so, while shelving animated films like Gigantic, sends out a message rife with bad implications. How can we expect the general public to accept animation as an art form when it seems like the king of animation doesn't respect the medium? Because these are sellout moves. Think about this. Disney is making a live-action version of the Chernobog moment of Fantasia. Fantasia was a movie that was designed from the ground up specifically to set animation to classical music. That was the point of the film, to set animation to music. I don't care how cool you make Chernobog look in live action. If you're making Fantasia in live action, you're missing the point of Fantasia. And that's not even the remake that bothers me the most. On principle, at least. The Lion King remake is quite up there. Ignoring whatever quality that it ends up being, I'm kind of annoyed that they're calling it a live-action remake. By necessity, if you want the movie to be accurate, all of the characters need to be CGI, computer animated. Yeah, sure, they'll be on live-action backgrounds, but, Dinosaur is a film with CGI characters on live-action backgrounds, and Disney themselves considers it one of their animated canon. What's the difference here? You know, besides Disney now being too cool for animation. Many of the movies they're remaking are less than 25 years old, which is just absolutely absurd to me. I'm not adverse to remaking movies like Alice in Wonderland or Snow White, but Beauty and the Beast, Aladdin, The Lion King, they're extremely recent. Much of the animation in these movies has aged absolutely flawlessly. You can watch these movies today and get the same experience you would back then. Especially because they're often shown in theaters. The Lion King was shown in theaters in 3D in 2010. Many of the times, Disney seems to have lost the plot on what made the movie so beloved in the first place. Mulan without musical numbers. Really. Not only one of people's favorite parts of the movie, but one of the best Disney soundtracks of all time. You're remaking Aladdin with no songs. Making Aladdin without Robin Williams as the genie, that's a battle that I don't even want to know if you want to fight. The most different version was Tim Burton's Alice in Wonderland, and it's gotten many detractors, and most people seem to prefer the original because the new one is too different. The most similar version was Beauty and the Beast, and people seem to prefer the original because they find the remake pointless, and it's not different enough. What's the point is actually a question I ask myself a lot when thinking about these remakes. Even some of the more off-the-wall choices like in The Jungle Book, or making Alice in Wonderland dark and gritty. We already have a dark and gritty Alice in Wonderland, American McGee's. Not saying another person can't try to make a dark and gritty Alice in Wonderland, but it's been done before. We've seen this. And we've already seen Disney try and tackle Alice in Wonderland. What's the point? What's new here? Making a remake and getting good critical consensus to match the original is a battle that you can't seem to win. If you go in the same direction, if you go in a different direction, it's a hard fight. But I think that they're doing this because I think that they have to. Disney is good at adapting things. That's what their bread and butter is. They've always gone back and made old stories new. It's something that they've been doing since the beginning. Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs was not originally Walt Disney's story. And at the same time, it's become harder and harder for them to access new stories. It's long been known that Disney has been fucking up the public domain for years. And I guess that they assumed that it would never catch up to them. These live-action remakes are what it looks like when this is finally catching up to them. Think about this. If the public domain laws were always the way that Disney had a large hand in fucking up, they would not be able to license Alice in Wonderland when they first made the Alice in Wonderland film. And there are several examples in the Disney animated canon. And now it seems like the public domain is so fucked up that they can't find any new material, since they've already done an adaptation of everything. So what choice do they have? You know, it's either buying everything from Maker Studios to Marvel to Star Wars, even if they have nothing to do with the image of Disney as a whole, or remake the stories that they've already remade, because Disney went out of its way to prove the usefulness of the public domain by killing the public domain. This is probably a topic for another day, but hopefully in 2019, we can actually stop this Mickey Mouse Protection Act shit. The Butt Monkey, the Megward the Wizard, the Jerry, the Oscar, whatever you want to call them. They're all the targets for abuse on this show. Entire episodes will be abusing them emotionally and physically, breaking into their homes, destroying their future, humiliating them, showcasing how pathetic they are in the grand scheme of things. And it's always painfully boring, especially when the episode wants to do nothing else. After you've seen the same exact thing happen to Squidward before in another episode, what reaction could you get this time, besides it being boring or cringeworthy? The worst Squidward torture episodes have a very claustrophobic feeling, as Squidward feels just trapped in a hellish scenario that he cannot escape from, no matter how hard he tries. And it's usually expected to be funny. All too often, it ends up feeling like an excuse for a joke, as it does with pretty much every Butt Monkey scenario. We wanted to put a joke here, but we couldn't think of one, so we're gonna abuse Squidward or whoever instead. Not helping is that when these characters do get abused, there is very little thought on the actual joke when it comes to things like timing. As for butt monkeys like Meg, whenever she gets abused, it usually feels arbitrary. She'll be thrown randomly into an episode or scene just to get crapped on, even if she appears nowhere else in the episode. And it's not funny there either. It grinds the rest of the episode to a halt for no good reason. And honestly, it's quite sad. Here's a person who's just standing there, minding her own business, and getting crapped on. And while Meg does go insane in the later seasons, it isn't wacky and wild like it's portrayed. It ends up seeming like a logical progression of events. Because when Meg started getting abused in her show, she was just supposed to be an average teenage girl. Stressed Eric is one of my top 10 least favorite shows of all time because it's built on this principle, and it's a perfect showcase to exactly why this doesn't work. Something bad happens to Eric. That is the basis of every single joke in the show. It becomes predictable. And when comedy is predictable, it fails. You can easily figure out that the world is going to give Eric pain no matter what. And not only that, in the worst way possible. So it's easy to predict exactly what's going to happen. And before long, it gets tedious. And on a story level, when it becomes clear that it's absolutely impossible for a character to succeed, it's nigh impossible to have any investment in their attempts to succeed. Both comedy and drama do need investment. You occasionally need to mix it up, you know? And you can only really do that by not having a butt monkey character. Butt monkey characters are intrinsically repelled from being explored in depth, given some established criteria to work with. Because the universe is just going to crap on them and destroy their dreams and make them realize that whatever they're doing is pointless. Jerry has some depth on Rick and Morty, but I know that the world is just going to crap on him in every opportunity. Every hobby he has in any random episode is just going to be used to showcase how pathetic he is. And thus, every time he's on the screen, all I'm thinking is, get off the screen so we can spend some time with the interesting people. I don't know what more I could say about this that I haven't already, besides the fact that this is another character type that you don't need to put in every single cartoon ever. Episodes trying to be funny that continually torment one character often end up more horrifying. You end up feeling sorry for these characters, and it can even end up tarnishing your view of the rest of the cast, as they callously go out of their way to beat up this poor innocent person. Not to mention that this trope found itself in many shows of the late 2000s and early 2010s that love to use the two douchebags annoy someone relentlessly formula, popularized by shows like Fanboy and Chum Chum.